People in our country illegally can self-deport the easy way, or they can get deported the hard way, and that's not pleasant. The Biden administration exploited the CBP-1 app to allow more than 1 million aliens to illegally enter the United States. Now my administration is launching the CBP Home app to give people in our country illegally an easy way to leave now and self-deport voluntarily. If they do, they could potentially have the opportunity to return legally at some point in the future. But if they do not avail themselves of this opportunity, then they will be found, they will be deported, and they will never be admitted again to the United States, ever again. You're never coming in. Using the CBP Home app to leave the United States voluntarily is the safest option for illegal aliens and our law enforcement. It also saves the U.S. taxpayer dollars and valuable CBP and ICE resources. And all of those resources are necessary to focus on dangerous criminal aliens, and that's what we're focused on. The CBP Home app is now available free across all mobile app stores, and I encourage those who have violated our laws to use this option today. Do it right and come back into our country. Do it wrong and you'll never be back again. So we're at the Kennedy Center. It needs a lot of work. We're going to fix it, make it beautiful. It's a very big part of the fabric of D.C. and the Capitol. We're bringing back the Capitol. We're bringing back our country. But while we're here, I thought it would be appropriate. We are tomorrow announcing and giving all of the Kennedy files. So people have been waiting for decades for this. And I've instructed my people that are responsible, lots of different people, put together by Tulsi Gabbard, and that's going to be released tomorrow. We have a tremendous amount of paper. You've got a lot of reading. I don't believe we're going to redact anything. I said, just don't redact. You can't redact. But we're going to be releasing the JFK files, and that would be tomorrow. Do you have anything else to add to that, Carolyn? So that's a big announcement. They've been waiting for that for decades. Then I said during the campaign I'd do it, and I'm a man of my word. So tomorrow you have the JFK files. What time will they be released? Tomorrow afternoon. Okay.
Have you seen what's in the files? Have you read them?
I've heard about them.
Was there,
Anything interesting?
It's going to be very interesting.
was there an executive summary supplied to you, Mr. President?
No, I'm not doing summaries. You'll write your own summaries. It's many pages. Is it 80,000 pages? Approximately 80,000 pages. So it's a lot of stuff. And you'll make your own determination.
You have criticized President Biden for using AutoPen in the last few days. Have you yourself ever used AutoPen, sir?
Yeah, only for very unimportant papers. And I don't call them unimportant. If you do letters where people write in and, they'd love to have a response, and we'll write responses. And I'll sign them whenever I can. But when I can't, I, would use an AutoPen. But to use them for what they've used them for is terrible.
Yes, sir. And when you signed the CR...
Who are you with?
Sir, I'm with NBC News.
Oh, that's the same one. I don't want to talk to NBC anymore. I think you're so discredited.
Mr. President, when most people think of the Kennedy Center, they think of the Kennedy Center Honors. It takes place in December every year. Is that something that you anticipate hosting at the White House? And what do you think that...
We're going to have honors. We're going to have, I think it's going to be a much bigger show than it has been in the past. It got tired, very boring, very radical left. Unless you were a radical left, it just seemed that nobody was chosen. There are a lot of people out there that can get the honors, and we're going to do it. I think we'll have a very big show. It's going to be a very big show. We have some surprises on that show, some big surprises, but I think it has a chance to be a very big show. That's a big part of the Kennedy Center, the honors that evening. And so I think you're going to be really surprised. I think it's going to get great ratings, actually.
Mr. President, there's been some discussion about potentially meeting with Putin in your administration. If there is a peace deal signed, would you be open to inviting Putin to the White House?
Well, I don't want to really even discuss it. I've got to get the deal signed. 2,000 people a week sometimes are killed. And we have to get that agreement signed, but that's the only thing I think about.
Are you confident that that could happen tomorrow, as soon as tomorrow?
We're going to have a very important call. You know, we've had calls, but we're getting down to a very critical stage. And we want to get the whole Russia-Ukraine thing done. And I think Ukraine wants it. I know they want it. Everybody wants it. It's tremendous death. The bloodshed is unbelievable, like few people have ever seen before.
And on the drug cartels, do you have a red line for the drug cartels that if crossed, it would automatically trigger a military response from the U.S.?
Well, we'll see, but we're not going to put up with it. This country is not going to allow people to come in and dump drugs and kill our youth, and other than our youth, too. Older people are very much affected, so it's we're not going to let that happen. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, on the 30-day ceasefire, Mr. President, is Ukraine's already committed to this? Would Russia commit to this as well, Mr. President?
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance.
Good morning, everybody. How we doing? It's great to be here. Thanks to everybody for having me today, in particular Ben and Mark. And I just got to say hello to Ben and Catherine backstage. But I know apparently Mark has the flu right now. So Mark, wherever you are, I think I had the same flu like a few weeks ago. It sucks, but I'm sure you'll get through it. And it's great to be with you all, and it's great to talk about the importance of American dynamism and what our administration is going to do to support so many of the country's most groundbreaking and compelling companies. I know that you guys are working hard every single day, and I think it's pretty good news, right, that as of a couple of months ago, you have an administration that's working with you and facilitating your hard work instead of making it harder to innovate, which is, I think, what the last administration did. Though, in defense of Joe Biden, he was asleep most of the time. I don't think he totally realized what he was doing, but certainly didn't make it easier. His administration did not for our innovators. Now, as some of you may have seen, and I talked about this with Ben backstage, I spoke at a conference in Paris last month where my message to a group of CEOs and foreign leaders was that we should embrace the future head on. We shouldn't be afraid of artificial intelligence, and that particularly for those of us lucky enough to be Americans, we shouldn't be fearful of productive new technologies. In fact, we should seek to dominate them, and that's certainly what this administration wants to accomplish. I suspect that most of you in this room are of like mind, and if you're not, I don't know why the hell you're at the American Dynamism Conference, but I received some pushback from people who are worried about the disruptive effects of AI. One journalist suggested the speech highlighted the tension between the, quote, techno-optimists and the populist right of President Trump's coalition. And today, I'd like to speak to these tensions as a proud member of both tribes. And let me put it simply. While this is a well-intentioned concern, I think it's based on a faulty premise. This idea that tech-forward people and the populists are somehow inevitably going to come to a loggerheads is wrong. I think the reality is that in any dynamic society, technology is going to advance, of course. And speaking as a Catholic, I think back to Pope John Paul II's opening lines of the encyclical Labor Amixarens, quote, "Through work, man must earn his daily bread and contribute to the continual advance of science and technology, and above all, to elevating unceasingly the cultural and moral level of the society within which he lives," end quote. Now, I quote the Holy Father not only because I'm a fan of his, but also because he rightly understood that in a healthy economy, technology should be something that enhances rather than supplants the value of labor. And I think there's too much fear that AI will simply replace jobs rather than augmenting so many of the things that we do. Now, in the 1970s, if you go back a little ways, many feared that the automated teller machine, what we call the ATM, would replace bank tellers. In reality, the advent of the ATM made bank tellers more productive, and you have more people today working in customer service in the financial sector than you had when the ATM was created. Now they're doing slightly different jobs, of course. Yes, they're doing more interesting tasks also, and importantly, they're making more money than they were in the 1970s. Now, when we innovate, we do sometimes cause labor market disruptions. That happens. But the history of American innovation is that we tend to make people more productive, and then we increase their wages in the process. And I think all of us believe that's a good thing. Now, after all, who would claim that man was made less productive by the invention of the transistor, or the metal lathe, or the steam engine? Real innovation makes us more productive, but it also, I think, dignifies our workers. It boosts our standard of living. It strengthens our workforce and the relative value of its labor. And as Americans, all of us should be particularly proud of our extraordinary heritage. I think it is American heritage of inventing things, and of our nation's status to this day as the world's foremost driver of research and development. But all of this, the role that technology plays in a labor market, and whether we greet innovative breakthroughs with excitement or with trepidation, depends on the purpose of our economic system in the first place. And I think this is where the populists have an important point. It should be no surprise that when we send so much of our industrial base to other countries, we stop making interesting new things right here at home. Look, for example, at shipbuilding. Now, if you go back to World War II, America constructed thousands of so-called Liberty ships to carry troops, cargo, and other things, building them at a pace of 3 ships every 2 days. 3 ships every 2 days. Now, we build about 5 commercial ships across an entire year in the United States of America. And as a result, the United States today accounts for 0.1%, 0.1% of global shipbuilding. China, on the other hand, now makes more commercial ships than the rest of the world combined. In fact, one of Beijing's state-owned firms built more commercial ships just last year than all of America has produced since the end of World War II. So, while we remain the leader in technology and innovation, I think there are troubling signs on the horizon. And I raise all this to ask, does this sound like a regime, I'm speaking of China, that will pass up on the opportunity to use AI or any other technology to advance their own interests and further undermine the interests of their rivals? I think the answer is obvious, and that's why America, we've got to be tech forward. Yes, there are concerns, yes, there are risks, but we have to be leaning into the AI future with optimism and hope, because I think real technological innovation is going to make our country stronger. So deindustrialization poses risks both to our national security and our workforce. It's important because it affects both. And the net result is dispossession for many in this country of any part of the productive process. And when our factories disappear and the jobs in those factories go overseas, American workers are faced not only with financial insecurity, they're also faced with a profound loss of personal and communal identity. And so to come full circle on this tension, alleged tension between the populists and the techno-optimists, I can understand a reaction of skepticism when we talk about the revolutionary potential of new invention and artificial intelligence and all the other incredible technologies that you guys are working. But I think that tension is a little overstated. And so I'm going to come back to what's sort of dividing some of the tech optimists and the populists on our side. I think the populists, when they look at the future and when they compare it to what's happened in the past, I think a lot of them see alienation of workers from their jobs, from their communities, from their sense of solidarity. You see the alienation of people from their sense of purpose. And importantly, they see a leadership class that believes welfare can replace a job and an application on a phone can replace a sense of purpose. Now, I remember a Silicon Valley dinner in particular back when I was in my tech days, where my wife and I were sitting around talking to some of the leaders of the important technology firms of the United States, and this was probably in 2016 or 2017. And I was talking about my real worry that we were heading in a direction where America could no longer support middle-class families working on middle-class wages. And importantly, that even if you had enough economic dynamism to provide the wealth to ensure those people could, afford to buy a house and afford their food and so forth, that even if you replaced the financial element of their jobs, you would destroy something that was dignified and purposeful about work itself. And I remember one of the tech CEOs who was there, CEO, you would know his name if I mentioned it. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. he said, well, I'm actually not worried about the loss of purpose when people lose their jobs. And I said, okay, well, what do you think is going to replace that sense of purpose? And he said, digital, fully immersive gaming. And then my wife texted me underneath the table and said, we have to get the hell out of here. These people are effing crazy. Now, I don't think that, of course, that CEO's views are representative of most people in this room, but when I think about a lot of the workers, based on what they've seen in the past, are very worried about the future because, frankly, their leadership has failed to serve them. And then I think about this from the perspective of a lot of the tech optimists. I think a lot of the tech optimists, they see overregulation, they see stifling innovation. I mean, you guys are builders. They are builders. And while they may sympathize with those who lost a job, they're much more frustrated that the government won't allow them to build the jobs of the future. And they know that as hard as it is to build a business in digital media, it's still harder to build one in robotics or life sciences or energy in what we call the world of atoms. They see a government that makes their lives harder, and they must trust anyone who looks to that government for aid. And what I'd propose is that each group, our workers, the populists on the one hand, the tech optimists on the other, have been failed by this government. Not just the government of the last administration, but the government in some ways of the last 40 years. Because there were two conceits that our leadership class had when it came to globalization. The first is assuming that we can separate the making of things from the design of things. The idea of globalization was that rich countries would move further up the value chain while the poor countries made the simpler things. You would open an iPhone box and it would say designed in Cupertino, California. Now the implication, of course, is that it would be manufactured in Shenzhen or somewhere else. And yeah, some people might lose their jobs in manufacturing, but they could learn to design, or to use a very popular phrase, learn to code. But I think we got it wrong. It turns out that the geographies that do the manufacturing get awfully good at the designing of things. There are network effects, as you all well understand. The firms that design products work with firms that manufacture. They share intellectual property, they share best practices, and they even sometimes share critical employees. Now, we assume that other nations would always trail us in the value chain, but it turns out that as they got better at the low end of the value chain, they also started catching up on the higher end. We were squeezed from both ends. Now, that was the first conceit of globalization. I think the second is that cheap labor is fundamentally a crutch, and it's a crutch that inhibits innovation. I might even say that it's a drug that too many American firms got addicted to. Now, if you can make a product more cheaply, it's far too easy to do that rather than to innovate. And whether we were offshoring factories to cheap labor economies or importing cheap labor through our immigration system, cheap labor became the drug of Western economies. And I'd say that if you look in nearly every country from Canada to the UK that imported large amounts of cheap labor, you've seen productivity stagnate. I don't think that's not a total happenstance. I think that the connection is very direct. Now, one of the debates you hear on the minimum wage, for instance, is that increases in the minimum wage force firms to automate. So a higher wage at McDonald's means more kiosks. And whatever your views on the wisdom of the minimum wage, I'm not going to comment on that here. Companies innovating in the absence of cheap labor is a good thing. I think most of you are not worried about getting cheaper and cheaper labor. You're worried about innovating, about building new things, about the old formulation of technology is doing more with less. You guys are all trying to do more with less every single day. And so I'd ask my friends, both on the tech optimist side and on the populist side, not to see the failure of the logic of globalization as a failure of innovation. Indeed, I'd say that globalization's hunger for cheap labor is a problem precisely because it's been bad for innovation. Both our working people, our populists, and our innovators gathered here today have the same enemy. And the solution, I believe, is American innovation. Because in the long run, it's technology that increases the value of labor. Innovations like the American system and the interchangeable parts revolution it sparked, or Ford's moving assembly line that skyrocketed the productivity of our workers. That's how American industry became the envy of the world. And that's what I really want to talk about today, why innovation is key to winning the worldwide manufacturing competition, to giving our workers a fair deal, and to reclaiming our heritage via America's great industrial comeback. And I believe that's what we're on the cusp of, a great American industrial comeback. Because innovation is what increases wages. It's what protects our homelands, and I know we have a lot of defense technology companies here. It's what saves troops' lives on the battlefield. And I know everyone here today largely agrees. It's why we have some of the greatest inventors and thinkers in energy, precision machining, countless critical high-value industries just in this room. And I think the other thing that unites all of you is that you're builders. And I use that word deliberately. I was very moved by Mark's manifesto from a few years ago about America. We are a nation of builders. We make things, we create things. Each of you came to this summit not because you developed some flash-in-the-pan application, but because you're building something very real. You're raising new factories, you're turning profits back into R&D, and you're creating new, good-paying jobs for your fellow Americans. And this is why I'm such huge fans of yours, of Ben's and Mark's, and of the entire endeavor. And that we recognize now in our administration is the time to align our work interests with those of all of you. It's time to align the interests of our technology firms with the interests of the United States of America writ large. Now, all of you, in your own ways, have answered that call. After all, there's nothing forcing anyone to be in the room today. Each one of you could have set up headquarters in Southeast Asia or China, I'm sure, and you would have done quite well for yourselves financially. But you're here, I hope, because you love your country. You love its people and the opportunities that it's given you, and you recognize that building things, our capacity to create new innovation in the economy, cannot be a race to the bottom. Now, America's not going to win the future by ditching child labor laws or paying our workers less than Chinese or Vietnamese laborers. We don't want that, and it's not on the table. We can only win by doing what we always did, protecting our workers and supporting our innovators, and doing both of those things at the same time. And so, I want to talk a little specifics here. The Trump administration's great plan for staging the great American manufacturing comeback is simple. You're making interesting new things here in America? Great. Then we're going to cut your taxes, we're going to slash regulations, we're going to reduce the cost of energy so that you can build, build, build. Our goal is to incentivize investment in our own borders, in our own businesses, our own workers, and our own innovation. We don't want people seeking cheap labor. We want them investing and building right here in the United States of America. And so if you'll allow it, I'd like to talk about a few ways that the Trump administration is already pursuing a pro-innovation economy that allows our workers to thrive and our companies to outcompete their foreign peers. In short, an economy that is vibrantly America first, that serves Americans from all walks of life and of every kind. Now, first, President Trump is starting with, and is dead serious, about rearranging our trade and tariff regime internationally. We believe that tariffs are a necessary tool to protect our jobs and our industries from other countries, as well as the labor value of our workers in a globalized market. In fact, combined with the right technology, they allow us to bring jobs back to the United States of America and create the jobs of the future. Just look in the past few months at the auto industry as an important example. When you erect a tariff wall around a critical industry like auto manufacturing, and you combine that with advanced robotics and lower energy costs and other tools that increase the productivity of U.S. labor, you give American workers a multiplying effect. Now that, in turn, allows firms to make things here at a price-competitive basis. Our president gets that, which is why last month we posted 9,000 new auto jobs after many, many years of stagnation or even decline in the auto sector. It's why, just weeks in, we already have new plant or production announcements from Honda, from Hyundai, and Stellantis worth billions of dollars and thousands of additional jobs on top of the ones that were already created. Now, this takes work. It took, in the president's first term, the president ripping up NAFTA and creating a new U.S. deal for American manufacturers in North America. But there's important work, and we're going to do it. Now, second, Second, all of this is why the president is approaching the issue of illegal immigration as aggressively as he has, because he knows that cheap labor cannot be used as a substitute for the productivity gains that come with economic innovation. And so we've cracked down on illegal immigration at the border, where the results speak for themselves. Last month, migrant crossings were down 94% to their lowest number all time, and that happened just in 2 months of serious border enforcement. Thanks to President Trump's leadership, last month, for the first time in over a year, the majority of job gains went to American citizens born on U.S. soil, and that's important. For the first time in over a year, the majority of job creation actually went to American citizens. The third, this administration is focused on reducing our input costs for our manufacturers and for everybody else. Achieving energy abundance, and I know Doug Burgum was here earlier, will be here later, is top of mind. Because when we look at some of the most exciting applications of new technologies, we realize it's going to take a lot of power to keep them running. And we're thrilled to have our friends from the United Arab Emirates, a number of the business leaders and government leaders in town this week for meetings with our government. And one of the things they consistently hammer upon is something that unfortunately too few of our European allies tend to get, is that if you want to lead in artificial intelligence, you have got to be leading in energy production. So we are going to set the pace there, and we are going to lead from the front. Now, we are already seeing, the good news is, signs of progress, even just a couple of months in. Gas and diesel prices are dropping, the cost of a barrel of U.S. crude is way down, and last Wednesday, the administration took major steps to make energy even cheaper and liberate our companies from stifling environmental regulations. Now, that is great, but of course, there's a lot more work we have to do over the next 4 years. Getting the tax bill right is especially critical for all of you and for all of your workers. We know how important it is to restore 100% bonus depreciation for capital investments, as well as full expensing for R&D. Again, we want people to invest in America, and we're going to make sure the tax code reflects that. In order to build on the success of the original tax law, meaning the tax law from the president's first administration, our administration is working to broaden some provisions that are critical to the industrial base, like expanding full expensing to cover factory construction. For business owners, including manufacturers, making the 2017 tax cuts permanent will provide further confidence and predictability to invest in new technology and equipment, hire more American workers, and grow all of your businesses. We have a lot more to do, but the country is already starting to see the payoff of this administration's bold economic agenda. For producers and consumers alike, inflation is finally starting to come down. Core CPI last week dropped to its lowest number since April of 2021. And when it comes to the labor market, last month's jobs report showed a massive reversal. 10,000 new manufacturing jobs created, where the previous year we had lost over 100,000 manufacturing jobs. As you may have heard the president say, in less than 2 months since he took office, he's already secured more than $1.7 trillion in new investments across the United States. That's hundreds of thousands of new jobs in manufacturing, AI, other hard tech sectors, and more. So we think there's a lot to be excited about. There's a lot that we're excited about, and we certainly hope that you guys are excited too. But the fundamental premise, the fundamental goal of President Trump's economic policy is, I think, to undo 40 years of failed economic policy in this country. For far too long, we got addicted to cheap labor, both overseas and by importing it into our own country, and we got lazy. We overregulated our industries instead of supporting them. We overtaxed our innovators instead of making it easier for them to build their great companies. And we made it way too hard to build things and invest things in the United States of America. That stopped 2 months ago, and it will continue to stop, and will continue to fight for American workers and the American businesses that hire them and that support them. So I want to thank you all for two things. Number one, I want to thank you all for doing what you do. Again, you could have chosen the easy path. Every single person in this room, as the president would say, you're all very high IQ. You're some of the most talented people in the United States of America. You chose to build a business right here in the United States of America, and for that I'm grateful. But the second thing I want to say is that I think you're not just building your own business, I think that you are part of a great American industrial renaissance. Whether it's the war of the future, the jobs of the future, the economic prosperity of the future, we believe that we must build it right here in the United States of America. So thank you all for building. Thank you all for building in America. And thank you all for building the kind of society that I want to raise my children in. God bless you all. Thanks for having me.
Hello, Mr. President.
Nice to see you all.
Likewise. Congratulations on the golf game, sir.
Oh, thank you. It was a lot of fun. It's good. We had a good time. And we learned a lot. We're doing pretty well, I think, with Russia. See, we have something to announce maybe by Tuesday. I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday. A lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance.
What sort of concessions will you be seeking to have Putin make to get a deal done?
Well, I think we'll be talking about land. There's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the war, as you know. We'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. That's up, it's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him to give
We're
up some
already
land?
talking about that. Dividing up certain assets. Yeah, and they've been working on that.
Mr. President, are you concerned though that any retaliatory reports from the strikes in Yemen?
About what?
The
Louder.
airstrikes in Yemen. Are you concerned about any retaliatory measures taken at all?
No, I'm not. Go ahead.
Mr. President, do you plan to comply with the judge's order regarding rehiring the federal workers?
What are you talking about?
The Clinton appointee judge that ruled that the federal government has to rehire the fired federal workers. Do you plan to comply
Well,
with
I think it's absolute. I have nothing to do with that other than I heard about the decision. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely. It's a judge that's putting himself in the position of the President of the United States, who was elected by close to 80 million votes. And you have that. You're having more and more of that. It's a very dangerous thing for our country. And I would suspect that we're going to have to get a decision from the Supreme Court. And that's a very dangerous decision for our country.
Mr. President.
These are people, in many cases, they don't show up for work. Nobody even knows if they exist. And a judge wants us to pay them even if they don't know they exist. If they exist. And I don't think that's going to be happening, but we'll have to see. You have to speak to the lawyers about that.
Mr. President, did the administration actually, speaking of orders, violate Judge Boasberg's order in sending back the Venezuelan gang members and not
Well,
bringing
you'd
them
have to
back?
speak. I don't know. You have to speak to the lawyers about it.
Are you planning to do more deportations?
I can tell you this: these were bad people. That was a bad group of, as I say, hombres.
Were you
That was a
erasing?
bad group. When you look at them and you look at the crimes that they've committed, you take a look. You don't get any tougher. You don't get worse than that. You understand that. But you'd have to ask the lawyers. Yeah.
Sir, there's been some criticism that the Alien Enemies Act has only been invoked 3 other times. They were all during times of war. Do you feel that you're using it appropriately right now?
Well, this is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level. They emptied jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. It's an invasion. And these are criminals, many, many criminals, murderers, drug dealers at the highest level, drug lords, people from mental institutions. That's an invasion. They invaded our country. So this isn't, in that sense, this is war. In many respects, it's more dangerous than war because, in war they have uniforms. You know who you're shooting at. You know who you're going after. These are people that came out, they're walking on streets. We have thousands of murderers. And Biden and his incompetency, first of all, he's grossly incompetent, but that Biden and his people and his probably auto pen, it looked like we had an auto pen for a president, and we would have been better off if we had probably. But it looks to me like, that's a big subject. I'm sure you won't ask about that, but the whole subject of auto pen Did he know what he was doing? Did he authorize it? Or is this somebody in an office, maybe a radical left lunatic, just signing whatever that person wants? That's not what it's all about. I never use it. I mean, we may use it as an example to send some young person a letter, because it's nice, we get thousands and thousands of letters and letters of support for young people, for people that aren't feeling well, etc. But to sign pardons and all of the things that he signed with an auto pen is disgraceful.
Mr. President, as markets and consumers continue reacting to tariffs, as markets and consumers react to tariffs, do you have any inclination to create exceptions or ease up on any?
About what?
To create exceptions to the steel and aluminum tariffs.
No, I have no intention of it. No.
Is this your economy?
April 2nd is a liberating day for our country. We're going to be getting back some of the wealth that very, very foolish presidents gave away because they had no clue what they were doing. And April 2nd, I would have made it April 1st, but you know what April 1st is? April Fool's Day, I figured. I don't like doing it, but I made it April 2nd. But it's a liberation day for our country because we're going to be getting back a lot of the wealth that we so foolishly gave up to other countries, including friend and foe. Yes, go ahead.
You've talked about the hangover from the Biden economy. Is this your economy now?
Certain things are. Certainly tariffs are. We've already taken in billions of dollars. We've taken in already billions of dollars, and we haven't even really started the program other than certain areas, certain pinpointed areas, as you know. Many billions of dollars have already come into our country. The big money is coming in on April 2nd, from April 2nd. But I will tell you what is smart. When I took it over, eggs were through the roof, and now eggs are down 35% over a short period of time. And other things, fuel, gasoline, energy is down, way down. Oil is down to $65 a barrel. It was $82 a barrel. And when energy comes down, pricing is going to come down. Prices for groceries, etc., are going to come down. So yeah, I think we're setting a good table.
Sir, on April 2nd's tariffs, are you planning to do sectoral and reciprocal tariffs? Will you do sectoral tariffs too?
What are you going to do in certain cases? Well, it's going to be reciprocal. In other words, whatever they're charging, we're charging. Very simple. If they're charging us, we're charging them. It's no longer they charge us and we don't charge them. It's foolish presidents. Biden, but others also. In all fairness, look, Biden is the worst president we've ever had. He made Jimmy Carter look like a good president. But with this, a lot of other presidents were guilty also. Some very good presidents were guilty. They charge us and we charge them. Then in addition to that, on autos, on steel, on aluminum, we're going to have some additional tariffs.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
So to follow up on the Biden auto pen, are those executive orders, those pardons from the former president now null and void?
Well, I think so. It's not my decision. That'll be up to a court. But I would say that they're null and void because I'm sure Biden didn't have any idea that it was taking place. And somebody was using an auto pen to sign off and to give pardons to, as an example, it's just one example, but the J6 Unselect Committee. They gave pardons with an auto pen. I don't think Biden knew anything about it. And what they did is they deleted and destroyed all of the information that took them over a year to get. And the reason they did that is because the information was very incriminating about them. Like Nancy Pelosi, who was determined conclusively that she knew about 10,000 soldiers and turned it down. And if we used 500 soldiers, you would have had no problem, let alone 10,000. The young lady that said that I grabbed these powerful young Secret Service agents by the neck. Okay, you know that was a big hoax. It was a lie. And she admitted it. And they deleted everything. So, what they did is criminal. I think we're about to land, everybody. Okay?
Mr. President.
Have a good time. We'll see you very soon.
Are you going to the Kennedy Center tomorrow?
I am. I'll see you at the Kennedy Center. We have to straighten it out. It's not a good situation, like everything else in this country.
Do you
But we're
worry
gonna straighten it.
because Vice President Vance was booed there a couple days ago that you may be driving?
And he's doing a great job. He's doing a great job. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Damn turbulence.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Happy Monday. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I see a lot of us are very festive in our green. Peter Ducey, I like it. First today, I want to address the devastating tornadoes and storms that have impacted many states throughout the South and the Midwest. As of this morning, more than 40 innocent lives have been lost, and many communities have been totally destroyed. The president has been actively monitoring the situation, and the Trump administration is engaged with governors and local officials to restore affected communities and livelihoods. Everyone impacted is in our prayers, and President Trump is fully prepared to assist state and local officials as they recover from the horrific damage. The president has had a very busy weekend, making our country and the world a much safer place. President Trump ordered decisive military action against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. These Houthi terrorists have engaged in piracy, violence, and terrorism against American ships for years under the Biden administration, costing billions of dollars and putting innocent lives at risk. Joe Biden's pathetic weakness invited these unacceptable attacks. But there's a new sheriff in town, and his name is Donald Trump. And the world is officially on notice. America has a commander-in-chief whose peace-through-strength approach is unwavering and should not be tested. As the president said, no terrorist force will stop American commercial and naval vessels from freely sailing throughout the world. Houthi terrorists and their Iranian backers should not cross President Trump again, and the president has made that clear today. On another important matter, President Trump signed a proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act regarding the invasion of the United States by the foreign terrorist organization Tren de Aragua. At the president's direction, the Department of Homeland Security carried out a counter-terrorism operation deporting nearly 200 violent Tren de Aragua terrorists, which will save countless American lives. Thanks to the great work of the Department of State, these heinous monsters were extracted and removed to El Salvador, where they will no longer be able to pose any threats to the American public. Tren de Aragua is one of the most ruthless terrorist gangs in the world, and they are responsible for some of the most heinous crimes that have occurred in our nation's history in recent years, including the savage murders of beautiful Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungray. President Trump promised Laken and Jocelyn's families during his campaign that he would demand justice for their beautiful girls, and that's exactly what he did. As the president acknowledged during his inaugural address on January 20th, he pledged to invoke this act, and he has no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions. President Trump will continue his historic efforts to seal the border and prevent these illegal invaders from coming here in the first place. As the New York Times is acknowledged over the weekend, President Trump's policies are working. Here's how the Times summed it up. Illegal crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border are down to their lowest level in decades. Once crowded migrant shelters are empty. Instead of heading north, people stranded in Mexico are starting to return home in bigger numbers. The border is almost unrecognizable from just a couple of years ago, when hundreds of thousands of people from around the world were crossing into the United States every month in scenes of chaos and upheaval. This is the Trump effect in action. And again, those are the words from the New York Times. We didn't need a border security bill. We just needed President Trump. All of these actions taken together are contributing to a wave of optimism about the direction of our great country. According to brand new polling from NBC News, more registered voters say the United States is heading in the right direction than at any point since early 2004. Americans support President Trump's common sense approach that's getting our country back on track in record time. Meanwhile, the president's critics can't say the same. That same new NBC poll also found that the Democrat Party has reached an all-time low in popularity. It turns out when you let your hatred of President Trump get in the way of doing what is best for America, the people reject you. Who would have thought? Joining us today in our new media seat is Kelly Meyer. She is a White House correspondent with News Nation. News Nation started in 2021 and is one of America's fastest growing cable news networks with a focus on news for all of America. It's part of a larger ecosystem, Nexstar, which is home to News Nation, the political website The Hill, the broadcast network The CW, and local Nexstar stations. With that, kick us off, please, Kelly.
Thank you, Caroline. What do you say to Americans who want safe streets but are concerned due process is being violated?
The president is using every lever of his executive authority and his constitutional authority within the bounds of the immigration laws of our country to ensure that our streets are safer for law-abiding American citizens. And this administration is focused on detaining, arresting, and deporting illegal criminal aliens. And as you saw this past weekend, the president used his authority under the Alien Enemies Act to deport foreign terrorists. Tren de Aragua is now a designated foreign terrorist organization. And as I said, there were nearly 200 Tren de Aragua members who were sent to El Salvador this weekend. Countless lives will be saved because of this action. And if you talk to the families, the Angel families, as I mentioned, Blake and Riley and Jocelyn Nungray, they understand the grave cost of life at the hands of these illegal terrorists. And the president is proud to deliver on that promise for them.
And just to follow up on that, this will be challenged later today in the courts. Does the president, does this allow him to defy the court order without having this the checks and balances and the separation of power?
No. In fact, this administration acted within the confines of the law, again, within the president's constitutional authority and under the authority granted to him under the Alien Enemies Act. We are quite confident in that, and we are wholly confident that we are going to win this case in court. Peter.
Thank you, Caroline. If you guys can't send 200 Tren de Aragua terrorists at a time to El Salvador, where are you going to send them instead?
It's a very good question. You'd have to ask the courts and the people on the left who are trying to fight this administration for doing the business that this president sought out to do, which is to deport these foreign terrorists. And we're very grateful to President Bukele and to El Salvador for accepting these heinous monsters where they will face justice.
And if these guys are terrorists at war with the United States, is President Trump considering anything more lethal to address them than just sticking them on a plane somewhere else?
Well, it sounded like you had a little bit of curiosity in the premise of your question, so I want to address it. These are designated foreign terrorists. The president signed a proclamation on February 20th, 2025, designating TDA as a foreign terrorist organization that was in consultation with the Attorney General and the Secretary of Treasury. That was pursuant to 8 U.S. Code 1189. The president has the right to do that. And I think nobody would argue that Tren de Aragua should be designated a foreign terrorist organization. If you want to have that argument, I'm happy to do it. These are heinous monsters, rapists, murderers, kidnappers, sexual assaulters, predators who have no right to be in this country, and they must be held accountable.
And something different. There is now a member of the European Parliament from France who does not think the U.S. represents the values of the Statue of Liberty anymore. They want the Statue of Liberty back. So is President Trump going to send the Statue of Liberty back to France?
Absolutely not. And my advice to that unnamed low-level French politician would be to remind them that it's only because of the United States of America that the French are not speaking German right now. So they should be very grateful to our great country. Kelly.
Is the administration prepared to give the court what it wants in terms of the time of the flights that departed, that went to El Salvador, and some of those details that the judge is asking for in trying to determine the timing? Clearly, the 5 named individuals were not deported.
That's right.
In compliance. But looking more broadly, wanting to know about the timing of flights and so forth, because the verbal order did say turn around the flights if there's an issue. So is the administration prepared to provide that information?
I'm prepared to provide it right now. All of the planes that were subject to the written order, the judge's written order, took off before the order was entered in the courtroom on Saturday. And the administration will, of course, be happily answering all of those questions that the judge poses in court later today.
And for people who have due process questions about making certain that there wasn't anyone who was swept up who did not meet the criteria that you laid out, is there a way for the administration to provide more detail about how that was determined, who the individuals were that met this deportation order?
Yes, I can assure the American people that Customs and Border Patrol and ICE and the Department of Homeland Security are sure about the identities of the individuals who were on these planes and the threat that they pose to our homeland. They take this incredibly seriously. They are putting their lives on the line to deport these designated terrorists from our country, and they should be trusted to do that. And that's exactly what the American people elected this president to do.
Thanks, Caroline. Just to follow up on that then, so you're saying definitively that the administration can prove everyone that was put on those flights in El Salvador was either a member of Tren de Agua, MS-13, or some other entity?
We've already provided the breakdown in the effort of transparency about the 261 illegal aliens who were deported. 137 of those were deported under the Alien Enemies Act. 101 of those were Venezuelans removed via Title VIII, which, as you know, are just regular immigration proceedings. And 23 of them were MS-13 Salvadorian gang members. There were also 2 MS-13 ringleaders as part of that group of 23 who President Bukele particularly expressed his gratitude for their return so he can demand justice in his home country. Jennifer.
What criteria, though, other than, say, tattoos or maybe being in the wrong place at the wrong time, are they using to determine that someone is actually a member of one of these organizations?
Intelligence and the men and women on the ground in the interior of our country who are finally being allowed to do their jobs. Their hands were tied under the previous administration, and as I said, they take their jobs very seriously. They should be trusted and respected by the American public with this operation. And of course, as I said to Kelly, the administration will provide all details to the questions that the court poses. Jennifer.
One more follow-up on that. Can you say how much the U.S. is paying El Salvador to imprison these Venezuelans? And then a different question on Russia. I was wondering if you could give us an update on the ceasefire negotiations, and is there anything you can share on the list that Putin passed along to President Trump for the things he's requesting?
Sure. To your first question, it was approximately $6 million to El Salvador for the detention of these foreign terrorists. And I would point out that is pennies on the dollar in comparison to the cost of life and the cost it would impose on the American taxpayer to house these terrorists in maximum security prisons here in the United States of America. And I would echo the message of our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who expressed his gratitude to President Bukele and El Salvador's government for their cooperation in this deal. As for Russia, as you know, the president announced last night on Air Force One on his return from his very busy weekend in Florida that he will be speaking to President Putin tomorrow. I won't get ahead of those negotiations, but I can say we are on the 10th yard line of peace, and we've never been closer to a peace deal than we are in this moment. And the president, as you know, is determined to get one done. Sure, Caitlin.
I have 2 questions for you. One on the flights, but first on the president's post overnight, saying that the pardons that were issued by President Biden preemptively to members of the January 6th committee, that they're now null and void. Have attorneys here at the White House told President Trump that he has the legal authority to undo a pardon simply because it was signed by auto pen, as he said?
The president was begging the question that I think a lot of journalists in this room should be asking about whether or not the former president of the United States, who I think we can all finally agree was cognitively impaired. I know it took people some time to finally admit that, but we all know that to be true, as evidenced by his disastrous debate performance against President Trump during the campaign. I digress on that. But the president was raising the point that did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature used without his consent or knowledge? And that's not just the president or me raising those questions, Caitlin. According to the New York Post, there are Biden officials from the previous White House who raised those questions and wondered if the president was even consulted about his legally binding signature being signed onto documents. And so I think it's a question that everybody in this room should be looking into, because certainly that would propose perhaps criminal or illegal behavior if staff members were signing the President of the United States autograph without his consent.
Biden is on the record talking about issuing preemptive pardons to these people.
But was he aware of his signature being used on every single pardon? That's a question you should ask the Biden White House.
Is there any evidence on that he wasn't aware of it?
You're a reporter. You should find out.
Okay,
Sean.
on the flights, so I have a question on the timeline of the flights. You keep talking talking about the judge's written order, which hit the docket Saturday night at about 7:26 p.m. But he issued a verbal order before that at about 6:45 and 6:48 p.m. based on the court hearing. A verbal order from the bench. Does the White House feel the need to comply with a verbal order from this judge?
Again, as I said, all of the planes subject to the written order of this judge departed U.S. soil, U.S. territory before the judge's written order.
But what about the verbal order, which of course carries the same legal weight as a written order, and said for the planes to turn around if they were
Well,
in the air?
there's actually questions about whether a verbal order carries the same weight as a legal order, as a written order, and our lawyers are determined to ask and answer those questions in court. Sean.
Hey, so on Friday, the president suggested at length that it should be illegal to criticize judges, but he has repeatedly criticized judges who rule against him, and Elon Musk is calling for impeachment of judges who have opposed the administration. So how are those two things not in conflict?
I have not heard the president talk about impeaching judges. I know you mentioned Mr. Musk's tweet, but I have not heard the president of the United States ask that. Mary.
Hey, thanks, Caroline. I wanted to ask about this video I saw this morning set to the tune of, I believe, Closing Time, about deportations of illegal migrants. What's the strategy behind the White House's videos they've been putting out on this, and can you kind of talk us through the thinking on these videos?
Sure. I think the White House and our entire government clearly is leaning into the message of this president. And we are unafraid to double down and to take responsibility and ownership of the serious decisions that are being made. The president was elected with an overwhelming mandate to launch the largest mass deportation campaign in American history, and that's exactly what he is doing. And to this very day, we are now, I think, 56 or 7 days into the administration by my count. The president still receives an overwhelming public support for the policies that he is enacting. So we are unafraid to message effectively what the president is doing on a daily basis to make our community safer. And the specific video you referenced, I think it sums up our immigration policy pretty well. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Go ahead.
Thanks, Caroline. I have two questions. First, will President Trump put sanctions on Russia if the talks on Tuesday don't go as hoped? And secondly, have any illegal immigrants self-deported through CBP home yet?
To your first question, it's something the president has floated, and certainly he's willing to do if necessary. I don't have anything to read out, and I would never get ahead of the president on such a serious decision. To your second question about the CBP Home app, I would have to check in with the Department of Homeland Security, but it's a great question, and we're very proud to repurpose this app, which the Biden administration abused to facilitate the mass illegal entry of illegal immigrants into our country. It was like a fast pass at Disneyland. That's not happening under this administration. We are encouraging illegal immigrants to actively self-deport to maybe save themselves from being in one of these fun videos.
Caroline.
Sure. John, good to see you.
After President Trump strafe-bombed the Houthis yesterday, he said that if they retaliate, he was going to personally hold Iran accountable for that. Holding them accountable, what would that look like?
Well, I would defer you to what the president put out this morning, John, where he said very clearly, I will read it, "Let nobody be fooled. The hundreds of attacks being made by Houthi, the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen, who are hated by the Yemeni people, are all created by Iran. Any further attack or retaliation by the Houthis will be met with great force, and there is no guarantee that the force will stop there. Iran has played the innocent victim of rogue terrorists from which they've lost control, but they haven't lost control. They are dictating every move, giving them the weapons, supplying them with money and highly sophisticated military equipment, and even so-called intelligence. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran. And Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire." That is a statement from the President of the United States just moments ago. I have nothing additional to share, but our message to Iran is you better take this president seriously, and I think the Houthis learned that the hard way this past weekend. As I said in my opening remarks, there's a new sheriff in town, and this president is not just going to sit on his hands and allow terrorists to launch attacks on commercial vessels and U.S. naval ships. Those actions will not be tolerated. Sure, Edward.
Yeah, thanks. Caroline, on the economy. So after mostly a down week last week in the economy, you've been very vocal as well as other cabinet members about how we're in a transition and about how this economic transition, and there's a plan, a long-term plan for tariffs on this. How concerned is the president that the markets and Americans, for lack of a better term, will freak out over these tariffs and be concerned about a long-term plan?
Sure. I think I've been asked this question and answered this question respectfully, Edward. We are in a period of transition. The president has made that clear. He also has made his belief in tariffs and what they will do for our great country clear, restoring wealth back to our country. And if you look at the president's first-term economic formula, massive deregulation, tax cuts, lowering the cost of living with an energy boom, which the American people can expect soon. Wall Street and Main Street should both be assured by what President Trump did in his first term. It's the exact same formula. In fact, I would argue it's even better this time around. And if you look at some of the economic indicators in the last week, the latest CPI report last week beat expectations. Inflation is cooling. Core inflation dropped for the first time in 4 months. The national average of the price of gas is down 42 cents from 1 year ago. And there was also a new report out this morning about wholesale egg prices. They continue to fall. A dozen eggs are now $3.10 cheaper since January 24th. First, that's a 47% decrease overall. So I think the American people do have great reason to be optimistic about this economy. And as I've said repeatedly, it continues to be true. The administration has a whole of government effort to fix the economic mess created by Biden.
So the president's pointed to that April 2nd tariff deadline, so to speak. Is the tariff back and forth sort of done now? We're just all looking towards April 2nd?
Well, I think the president would tell you that all options are always on the table, and he's always ready to respond if he feels the United States is being unfairly treated by our allies and also our competitors around the world. But yes, the April 2nd day is a big day for the country, as the president has said. Reciprocal tariffs will go into effect. We'll have more details on that as the date nears, but our entire trade team, Secretary Lutnick, Secretary Bessent, the vice president has been quite involved in these talks and discussions as well about what that will look like. And the president, as you always do, you will hear from him directly on it. Deborah Saunders, how are you?
Fine. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Former pardon attorney Elizabeth Boyer believes she was fired for refusing to sign off on a move to restore gun rights to actor Mel Gibson. DOJ's Todd Blanche says no. But I want to know, is the administration dedicated to restoring gun rights to felons who served their times? I ask this because I've talked to people who were pardoned. They felt that was important. Of course, this isn't necessarily for a pardon. What is the president's thinking on this issue?
Sure.
After you've served your sentence, should you have gun rights?
It's an important question. It is one I have not spoken to the president about on his views, but I will take it to him this afternoon. I will tell him you asked, and we will get you an answer. You're welcome. Jonathan.
Thanks a lot, Carolina. A question for you regarding the administration complying with judges' orders. I want to ask about an administration spokesperson who's the border czar, Tom Homan. He was on Fox News.
We love Tom Homan.
And he was talking about the deportations, and he said the following. He said, "We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think," which seems to me, just reading that, that you don't care what orders come from the federal bench. Is that the case? Can you clarify that, please?
Well, I think since you just quoted Tom, I'll quote Tom. He said, "I don't care what the judges think, but I can assure you that the administration is complying with the court order." And as I've said repeatedly from this podium, all of the flights that were subject to the judge's written order departed before the written order, and we are prepared to make that case in court later this afternoon. Reagan.
And then if I could, on Russia, the president, as you pointed out, Caroline, made some remarks on Air Force One coming back from Florida, and he seemed to indicate that the conversation tomorrow concerns essentially dividing up assets, dividing up territory associated with the war in Ukraine. Has President Zelensky given President Trump that authority? Is that what is going to take place tomorrow?
Well, as you know, the president and his entire national security team have been engaged directly with President Zelensky and the Ukrainian team, and that has been part of the discussion between the president's team and the Ukrainians. As for where those lines will be drawn or any specifics, I am not going to get into that from this podium. It would be unwise for me to get ahead of the president's call with President Putin tomorrow. But again, I can assure you, in the effort of transparency, as this president always does, you will hear from him or one of us directly after that phone call tomorrow. Reagan.
Thank you, Caroline. There's a
lot of focus on the judicial branch right now. The president has about 40 judicial appointments that he could make at this moment. Do you have an update on what the timeline would look like for those judicial appointments? And does the president have a list of potential nominees that he's vetting? I do not have an update on a timeline, nor do I have a list, but I can certainly have our team gather that for you and provide it. You're welcome. Sure. Go ahead. Sure.
Thank you, Caroline.
Go
So
ahead.
the president is visiting the Kennedy Center this afternoon to
He
attend
is.
a board meeting. A question about what happened a few weeks ago. The Kennedy Center got bomb threats targeting a performance by Shingyun Performing Arts, which is an American company showcasing China before communism. This company has been targeted, unfortunately, by the CCP for years. I'm wondering if this administration has a response to this, and also as the president is putting an emphasis on arts and culture, what's the administration's message to potentially foreign state actors who are trying to disrupt that in the U.S.?
Don't disrupt it. This administration will take that very seriously and hold you accountable. We obviously condemn any violence or threats of violence against American institutions. And the president will be traveling to the Kennedy Center later this afternoon. I look forward to going with him. As you know, he is now the chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center, where he hopes to restore arts and culture that embrace American tradition, don't disparage it, as we have unfortunately seen over the past several years. The president will be doing a tour of the center. In his business developer mind, I'm sure he will make some recommendations on how the center itself can be improved, but also we'll be discussing perhaps some future plays and musicals and theatrical programs that the center will be hosting under his new leadership and the board's new leadership. Daniel.
Will the president be discussing with Putin tomorrow the future of Volodymyr Zelensky? Sort of a follow-up to John's question.
Again, I've been asked and answered this question now. I'm not going to get ahead of the president's discussion tomorrow, but after the phone call takes place, I can certainly provide a readout. Daniel.
Caroline, thank you so much. You mentioned earlier in the briefing that you guys are at the 10-yard line of peace. Given the amount of progress that you've made in such a short amount of time, is that an indictment of the previous administration's foreign policy stance, and is it just more proof that you need to talk to people to sort of get things done?
I think so. I think the previous administration is the reason this war began. As President Trump often says, this war would have never started if he were still in office. It only started because of the incompetence and the weakness of the previous administration. And President Trump is very proud of the progress that he and his team have made in such a short amount of time. And hopefully tomorrow that progress will move forward. Sure.
Thanks. There have been some media reports just in the last few hours that the administration has decided to withdraw from the International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine, which is designed to hold Putin accountable for war crimes. Are you able to confirm that? And if that has occurred, why has that occurred?
I'm not able to confirm it because I have not heard that. I will caution, I know there have been many inaccurate and misleading reports from Reuters lately, so I would caution anybody taking that seriously, but I can check in and get back to you. Rachel.
Thanks, Caroline. Is it the president's belief that the Justice Department should be investigating members of the January 6th Select Committee? Is he directing the DOJ to do that?
As the president made it very clear in his address on Friday, I believe some of you were there, I was there, he made his vision for what he would like to see of the Department of Justice very clear, but he said that he has appointed great people in Attorney General Pam Bondi and also in our FBI Director Kash Patel to do what they think is best for our justice system and to stop the weaponization of justice that we saw under the previous administration against not just President Trump but his supporters as well. We want to restore the Department of Justice to an institution that focuses on fighting law and order and crime and putting real criminals behind bars, not targeting Americans because of their religion or their political speech. We saw that under the previous administration and it's unacceptable to this president.
And just to follow up really quickly on just Homan's comments from earlier, a few weeks ago in the Oval Office, the president said he will always abide by the courts. We heard what Tom Homan said earlier today. So I'm only asking just to be clear for the American people. It is the administration's belief that they will that you feel like you are bound to comply by the judge's orders?
We are complying with the judge's orders.
Question on the storm.
Sure.
What role does the president see for FEMA with these storms? He's talking about getting rid of FEMA, states handling their own disasters. he planning to change how the federal government responds to these storms?
There hasn't been a change yet. That doesn't mean there couldn't be in the future. But as of right now, the president, the entire administration are actively monitoring the storms, as I said. In fact, before I came down here, there was an email note in my inbox from the Department of Homeland Security on what they are actually doing state by state across the board. So rest assured, Secretary Noem and her team is on it, and I would defer you to the Department of Homeland Security for any further details.
One more question. The president referenced power plants with a conversation with Vladimir Putin. What is he referring to with power plants? What is that?
There's a power plant that is on the border of Russia and Ukraine that was up for discussion with the Ukrainians, and he will address it in his call with Putin tomorrow.
The nuclear plant.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Caroline?
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you if you would be releasing more granular data about the people who were sent to El Salvador this week. Particularly, will you be releasing their names?
I don't believe so because of the privacy concerns at this point in time. That doesn't mean we won't eventually. I would defer you to the Department of Homeland Security for more details on the individuals on the flights, but we have been incredibly transparent in giving you the breakdown of the numbers and also some of the crimes committed by these heinous criminals and individuals: kidnapping, sexual abuse of a child, robbery, aggravated assault on a police officer. I would remind everybody in this room that Tren de Aragua is a foreign terrorist organization operating within the United States of America because the previous administration allowed them to invade our country. These are monsters who tortured, raped, and murdered a 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungre. They murdered 22-year-old nursing student Laken Riley. They led a multi-state sex trafficking operation involving smuggling women into the United States, holding them in stash houses in Louisiana, Florida, New Jersey, Texas, and Virginia, and forcing them into prostitution. They kidnapped and murdered a 33-year-old woman in Texas. They sexually and physically assaulted a woman and her daughter in Wisconsin. They conducted a mass shooting in Illinois. They peddled untraceable ghost guns across New York City, took over an Aurora, Colorado apartment complex where they kidnapped and tortured victims. And by the way, many of you in the mainstream media said that didn't happen. It turned out that it did. And because of the effective immigration policies of this administration, those foreign terrorists were detained and they are no longer operating on American soil, and we have President Trump to thank for that. We'll see you guys later at the Kennedy Center. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Caroline.
So thank you very much. We're here to have our first board meeting, Kennedy Center, and it's in tremendous disrepair, as is a lot of the rest of our country, most of it because of bad management. This is a shame what I've watched and witnessed. They spent a fortune, $250 million, and they built these rooms that nobody's going to use, rooms underground. And I've often wondered, what are the big cubes that they have outside that block the view? They're cubes with a door in them so that people can get down to rooms that nobody's going to use. And it's a shame. It's a shame. The other thing is I'm going to have a little problem with some people that work here. We had Lee Greenwood wanted to sing a little song today, and because of the cost in the union structure, for him to sing a song just for the board, just a board meeting, it was going to cost $30,000. That doesn't sound too good. They wanted $30,000 to move a piano, so you can't have that. So we're gonna fix it up. But it's really emblematic of our country. At the Kennedy Center, you look at the columns outside. You look at, I mean, they're supposed to be covered by something, whether it's marble or whatever, granite. They were never covered. They were painted, but. Bring it into more modern times, a lot of money's been given to it, and the money has not been properly spent. They built rooms underground with no windows, no nothing, that will not be used ever. You're not going to have people use them. It's such a waste of money, such a terrible waste, but we'll bring it back, we'll make it great again. But it is so much like what I'm witnessing in other places. We have open borders. We have men playing in women's sports. It's all the same thing. It's all the same mentality and thinking. So I'm very disappointed when I look around. The bottom line, it has tremendous potential, and we'll work with Congress. As you know, it's a very public facility, and we'll do what has to be done. We'll be having a meeting with the Speaker in the not too distant future. I think it's important to save this structure in this building. I think maybe we close up some of the work that's been done and built because it was done terribly. It was done terribly. The concept was very bad.
Mr. President, how is it so important for you to come here today to the Kennedy Center? You have so much on your plate. Why come today here?
This represents a very important part of D.C. and actually our country. And I think it's important to make sure that our country is in good shape and is represented well. When people look at this, I've been hearing for a long time that they come here and they're very disappointed. When they come here, I want them to be excited. We're bringing a big move onto Washington, D.C. We're going to stop the crime. We actually worked with the mayor. We took down a lot of tents that were all over the place in front of the State Department. And they did a good job of that. I was very happy with what the mayor did. She was able to get them out quickly and at my direction and at the direction of the administration. But we're cleaning up Washington, D.C. This is a big part of Washington, D.C.
Mr. President, for Americans visiting Washington, perhaps they're thinking about seeing a show at the Kennedy Center.
Yeah.
What would you tell them? They've never been here before and they want to come check it out?
Yeah, I'd say come here and see a show. I was never a big fan of, I never liked Hamilton very much, and I never liked it. But we are going to have some really good shows. I would say this, come here and watch it, and you'll see over a period of time it'll improve very greatly physically. And we're going to get some very good shows. The thing that does well are Broadway hits. And we have some beauty. I guess we have Les Mis coming, and we have some others, but the Broadway hits have done very well. So I'm going to spend some time. We have a good board. In the meantime, we're running the country, and we're running it well. We have tremendous things to report. Tomorrow I'm speaking with President Putin of Russia to save some soldiers who are in deep trouble. They're captured. Essentially, they're surrounded by Russian soldiers. So I give you a lot of different things in one news conference, but it's a big deal. They're surrounded by Russian soldiers, and I believe if it wasn't for me, they wouldn't be here any longer. I was able to get them not to do anything at this moment, but it's a bad situation in Russia, and it's a bad situation in Ukraine. What's happening in Ukraine is not good, but we're going to see if we can work a peace agreement, a ceasefire and peace, and I think we'll be able to do it. I'm speaking to President Putin tomorrow morning, yes. Yeah. No, not at all. No, not really the opposite. I think it was appreciated, and we have to understand, and you have to understand, that if I see somebody doing something bad that's going to cause a lot of death, the only reason I'm involved, and this is Russia and Ukraine, but a lot of people, it's humanity. I'm involved for humanity. A lot of people are being killed over there, and we had to get Ukraine to do the right thing. It was not an easy situation. You got to see a little glimpse at the Oval Office. But I think they're doing the right thing right now, and we're trying to get a peace agreement done. We want to get a ceasefire and then a peace agreement. Who you with? So we're going to see how it all works out. This was Joe Biden's deal. This isn't Trump's deal. This is Joe Biden's deal. He gave $350 billion to Ukraine, and he shouldn't have done it. It wasn't secured. Europe gave $100 billion, and it was in the form of a loan. They get their money back. And they should actually have much more in it than us. But Joe Biden was grossly incompetent, and it's a shame what they did. $350 billion. We could have rebuilt our entire Navy for that kind of money.
Mr. President, sir, there were 18 Secret Service agents protecting Hunter Biden in South Africa this weekend. Who's paying for that, and do you plan to revoke the Secret Service protection?
Well, we have done that with many. I would say if there are 18 with Hunter Biden, that will be something I'll look at this afternoon. Okay?
Sir?
I just heard about it for the first time. So you have 18 Secret Service going. Where is he exactly?
In South Africa.
In South Africa. And South Africa, you know, is on a watch list. You know that. because what they're doing to people is brutal. And I've stopped having money go to South Africa. You know that. Billions of dollars. So he's in South Africa. That's very interesting. All right, I'm going to take a look at that. Thank you very much.
A Catholic church in Wichita, Kansas over the weekend was vandalized, statues destroyed, glass smashed, graffiti all over the place. Church officials in Kansas call it a hate crime. I know you signed an EO, eradicating anti-Christian bias. But sir, what more can the White House do to protect places of worship like St. Patrick's Church in Wichita, Kansas?
Well, we're going to take a look. I love Wichita. You know, I got big votes there. We won that state by a lot. We'll take a look at that. When did this happen?
This happened over the weekend, sir. Again, statues destroyed.
Terrible. Yeah, I think it's a terrible thing. And this was a Catholic church.
Yes, St. Patrick's.
Okay, I'm going to take a look at it.
Perpetrated tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, sir.